Pagan priestess Starhawk was once asked if she believed in a goddess. She replied, "Do you believe in rocks?" Meaning, there are some things that are so obvious and self-evident that belief is unnecessary. All you need to do is open your eyes. Some sacred practices require a particular belief to fully appreciate. Easter comes to mind. If you believe in Jesus Christ and the resurrection, Easter is a celebration of that prophecy fulfilled and the salvation of all humankind. If you don't believe that story, it's a long meeting in uncomfortable shoes followed by a candy sale. Solstices and equinox celebrations are different. They're like rocks, visible, easily perceivable realities. The days get shorter from summer solstice to winter solstice, and then they lengthen again. The sun rises and falls and rises. At the equinox, day and night, summer and winter stand in perfect balance. Human cultures all over the world have noticed, observed, watched for, and celebrated these days, watching the skies, marking time by them. Calendars were developed. The best time to plant and harvest crops were noted. Seasons passed, and each season had its tasks. Ancient people knew that when night and day were in perfect balance, the next season was already upon us, and we needed to prepare or be prepared. They all worshiped different gods and called them by different names, but the astronomical phenomena of solstices and equinoxes was a useful, observable reality that didn't require belief in any myth. And yet the myths came. Saturnalia, Yule, later Christmas, and Santa Claus, or Father Christmas. Jesus' birthday moved from the spring to the winter solstice when cultures already celebrated the birth of the sun. They just spelled it differently now. Makar Sankranti in India, Hanukkah, the stories of Lu and Balor, and countless other gods whose power transitioned at the solstice days. The Holly King and the Oak King, various midsummer festivals, very often marked by a ritual transition of power from one king to another, or by ceremonial sacrifice of something that either represented the wishes and dreams of the people or something meant to represent the life lived in the previous 6 months in preparation for the next 6 months. The equinoxes also had their own traditions. Spring equinox is usually celebrated as a time of renewal. Fall equinox is a harvest festival in most cultures. We create stories about these days. So many that we'd be here all day long if I tried to list them all, and we have a solstice festival to get to, so I will spare you that. Humans attach meaning to this cycle of time. Now, we come to this church from many different religious traditions. Whether you've been a UU your whole life, or whether you used to be Catholic or Mormon, whether you were raised Christian or Muslim or Buddhist, we come here each week to a church without creed or dogma that makes room for multiple paths, have a look at those nice blue banners, to celebrate values that we all agree on, not to argue over which of those stories is true. But even if you don't literally believe in any single story, they're all worth exploring. They have things to teach us, and our denomination agrees. The official UU sources of faith include, quote, spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred cycle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythm of nature. So let's explore some of those traditions. And let's start with the hymn that we all just sang. I didn't choose the music for this service, but when we sang Mother Earth, Beloved Garden, it occurred to me that some of you may not know that the items mentioned at the end of each verse correspond to items that sit on a Wiccan altar and correspond to each of the elements. The blade corresponds to air, it's called an LaFlamme. The wand corresponds to fire, the chalice to water, and the pentacle to earth. You may not know that, now you do. Solstice stories very often are about kings. The solstices show us the pattern of rising and falling and rising and falling power, very closely linked to the power of the sun. In many pre-Christian faiths, the sun was linked to the divine masculine power, while the moon is linked to the divine feminine. In ancient times, the king was a sacred figure whose body and soul were connected to the land that he ruled. If the king was unhealthy, the land would be as well, and vice versa. Think of the story of King Arthur and how his land falls into ruin as his kingship falls into ruin. The king was also often chosen by his people and not birthed into a hereditary line. Throughout Western Europe, the crowning of a new king was a sacred responsibility conferred by the priests and other religious figures, not by a secular tribal government. They still do this in Britain. The ceremonies often include rituals that affirm that the king's body is now also the body of the land. So fertility rites were extremely common. You needed a fertile land to grow fertile crops to nourish your people. Sacred kingship came with very specific responsibilities: to become a vessel for the energy of the land, and crucially, at some point, to give up that power to a successor. The man who assumed this role understood that his reign would end, either on a specific day or when he or the land showed signs of declining health. In what is now the UK, much of Western Europe, and almost all of Scandinavia, the pagan solstice rites were about this transition of power. The Irish myth of Luan Balor is the story of a promising young leader kicking the more mature king off the throne before he burns everything with that solar power that's grown too powerful. Ritual dramas are common. If you attend a Wiccan solstice ritual, you will probably see the Holly King and the Oak King, played by two former theater majors reliving the glory days, staging a ritual sword fight with varying skill to enact this symbolic transfer. Why does any of this matter to us? We have no kings in America. And we definitely don't have what the idea of sacred kingship became once the medieval church got a hold of it. Christianity changed the idea of what a king was in a really, really important way. If Jesus Christ was now the king, and he was infallible and perfect, and he didn't rule a specific land and a specific people, but was instead the leader of all the people who accepted his message, so his kingdom had no borders, then shouldn't any king of a Christian country aspire to the same thing? From this point, we got the idea that the king was divine, the king was infallible, and to be obeyed as one would a living representative of Christ. You've all heard of the divine right of kings, the idea that the king's power is ordained. It took on a very different meaning in Christian societies than pagan. We lost the idea of the sacred king as a term-limited vessel for his people's energy. And instead, we started seeing a king as an infallible figure who was also kind of all-powerful. All of his people's problems would come to him, and he could solve them all. And we got a bunch of empires that sold the conquest of foreign lands to their people by claiming that they were doing them a favor by spreading the gospel to the heathens to save their souls. But I digress. The ancient solstice rites teach us instead that power is cyclical and never permanent. The best leaders become servants, not tyrants, and they relinquish their thrones when their work is done. A wise king knows when to lead and when to step aside. He doesn't let his people idolize him to that degree. He doesn't take their power away by lying to them or telling them that he alone can fix their problems. Instead, he nurtures their potential and builds up the health of his kingdom for the next generation. We could use more leaders like that. But putting aside the questions of divine royalty, watching that turning of the wheel of the year has benefits for us that we don't always think about. Who hasn't looked at a calendar and said, my gosh, it's June already? Where did the time go? We get immersed in the day-to-day things of our lives, and we lose track of how much time is passing. Watching the turning of that wheel of the year can also inspire us to meditate on the passage of time. Another season has passed. We are older. 6 more months has gone by. We're not immortal. What have we gained or lost in this cycle of time? What did we take for granted? What mistakes did we make? What will we do differently in the next? We can also take comfort in the idea that this too shall pass. The seasons are constantly changing. We take comfort in knowing that no season lasts forever. Whatever the weather is today, it's going to be different. On the darkest night, the days begin to lengthen. On the longest day, the heat begins to fade. We can take a moment at the height of summer to enjoy the warmth, even though and especially because we know that winter will come. And finally, each season has tasks. Our ancestors waited for the spring equinox to plant the crops and fall equinox to harvest, some of them at least. There are times to plant and times to harvest, time to build and time to rest. The seasons of our lives have tasks as well, and it really doesn't do us any good to rehash our old mistakes from a previous season, or dream or bite our fingernails endlessly about the next season. You have things to do now. What are they? Living in the harmony with these seasons is good for you. And adopting this as a spiritual practice is one of the things that I've found most valuable about the pagan world. Meditating on this ancient cycle of time can bring us into harmony with our bodies, our minds, our communities, and our loved ones. And while there are plenty of stories about this time of year to choose from, you can also make up your own. No gods are required. Thank you.